Very good morning, children. Today we are going to cover the second part of the chapter Mother's Day, where I left yesterday. Next paragraph will be covered today and the upcoming more. Let us start. The paragraph where I left yesterday, Mrs. Israel. It was the chance of Mrs. Israel to speak. Before starting the chapter, I want to recap something about the previous paragraphs. Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Israel, they both were talking together, sitting at the center hall of Pearson's villa. They were talking about the problems, about the reactions of children, Doris and Cyril. As Mrs. Fitzgerald suggests her to be courageous, to do something that will be useful for our children to learn a lesson about respect, about caring, about loving, about the responsibilities. According to Mrs. Fitzgerald, every husband's and sons, daughters, they must respect to the sisters, wives or women. So Mrs. Pearson doesn't want to be there. She doesn't have the dare to do as Mrs. Pearson suggests her. So that she hesitates and requires some suggestions how to do it, how to start it. So Mrs. Pearson says, she talks about the hints which will be the need of Pearson's family. How does she explain and suggest Mrs. Pearson further? Let us start and let you know. Mrs. Pearson, hint, it is more than hints your family needs. Mrs. Pearson. Fitzgerald says that your family, your husband George Pearson, your son Cyril, and your daughter Doris, this is more important than hints for them. If you are taking it shortly, if you are taking it as a normal problem or normal reaction of children for their mother, so you are wrong here. Okay, you should do something. It is not justified and it is unacceptable in the society. Mrs. Pearson, deviously, as this word has been written on the board, dubiously, it means doubtfully. She was not sure what about the neighbor. Fitzgerald was saying. She was reacting as confused lady. Mrs. Pearson was reacting as confused. She was not getting it completely. She says that, but I do have any unpleasantness. I am agree. Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Pearson. She is the main character. She says that I am agree with you, but I do not like any unpleasantness, unhappiness in my family. And it is so hard to know where to start. And I am getting confused where to start it from, how to do what you are suggesting me. I keep making up my mind to have it out with them, but somehow I don't know how to begin. I also want to do something like this. so that my children will respect and they will give me an honor. But I am confused how to start and where to start it from. She glances at her watch or at a clock. Mrs. Bearson, she watches or she has a glance. She looks in her watch. It was ringing very late. God, good gracious. She says that, oh my God, look at the time. We are so late. I have to prepare lunch for them. And if I am not preparing the lunch for my family, like son, daughter, so they will cry at me. So she was surprised watching the clock because she was very late. Nothing ready, and they will be home any minute and probably all in a hurry to go out again. Nothing is ready. I have not prepared something for them, lunch, tea, or anything else. They will be here after a few minutes and probably all in a hurry to go out again, and perhaps they will have to go back again out of the home. So it is my duty to prepare something for them. As she is about to rise, Mrs. Israel reaches out across the table and pulls her down. As Mrs. Pearson is about to rise, about to leave from the table, Mrs. Israel crosses and she bends down at the table, on the table, and pulls her down. And she hints her to sit down again and to talk further. Mrs. Israel says, let them wait or look after themselves. Mrs. Israel suggests that let them look after them. Let them stand for their own responsibilities. Let them be independent. How till or how much will you be worried about them if they are not taking their responsibilities? So it is making them handicapped if they are not going to stand for their responsibilities, for their duties. So what is the time and when will you be there to help her? Next, start now. This is where your foot goes down. This is the place or this is the moment when you are not collecting your courage and you are not getting ready to face up the challenges and to do something. You are going back. She lights a cigarette from the one she has just finished. Now, talking together, Mrs. Israel lights up a cigarette, and it was lighted up by that cigarette which was just finished by her. Mrs. Pearson, embarrassed. Embarrassed means ashamed. She was ashamed. Okay. And ashaming, like a woman, she says, Mrs. Israel, I know you mean well, in fact. I agree. I am satisfied with your suggestions. I am satisfied with your suggestions. However, I do not know how to do. She agreed with Israel, but she just can't do that. Why? Because she was very worried, very caring and loving mom for her children. And she does not want them to be worried and unhappy due to their mom. If she is going to do something which is different as she used to do with them, they will be irritated and disturbed. And it is no use you trying to make me if I promise you had really have it out with them. I know I will not be able to keep my promise. Really, if I promise, if I tell you that I'll do it anyhow, or definitely I'll do it. However, I am not sure about this, that I'll be there and I'll do it. I am confused about this. Even I promise to you to do. Mrs. Israel, then let me do it. Mrs. Israel says that if you are unable to do it, if you are not taking as priority, or you are not giving importance to this, so let me do it. I can handle it and I can help you. Mrs. Bearson flourished. Oh no, she hesitated. That what is going on? How will you solve my family problem? Thank you very much, Mrs. Israel, but that would not do at all. It could not possibly be somehow else. They had resent it at once and could not listen. Mrs. Pearson, she replies to Mrs. Israel that it could not possibly be somebody else. How is it possible that somebody else would be at my place? It is just irritating me, it is surprising me. How is it possible? I am not thinking as you are suggesting me. So, they had resent it at once and would not listen. If somebody else or somebody would be at my place, maybe they will not react them also properly. So how is it possible? It is out of my mind. And really I could not blame them. And if they are doing and reacting like this, I could not blame at them. I will not be there if something will happen wrongly. Next line, I know I ought to do it, but you see how it is. I know. Agreeing with all the statements and all the conditions of Mrs. Israel, Mrs. Bearson eventually constructed just she goes against her instructions and finally she says that how is it? How is this possible for me? She says, she looks apologetically across the table, smiling rather miserably. She is completely confused. Most of the time, she is agreeing and she is telling to Mrs. Israel that I know all and I ought to do this. But how to do this? She is not taking it as serious as Mrs. Israel was taking. So what happens next? Mrs. Israel, coolly, you have not got the idea. Mrs. Israel says that, coolly, she is just in the relaxed mind and relaxed moment. She says that, you have not got the idea. You don't know how to do. So let me tell you. Mrs. Pearson knocks. Bewildered. Oh, I am sorry. I thought you asked me to let you do it. Bewildered. Again, this word. Bewildered. Shocked. Shocked. She was surprised. Okay. And says, I am sorry. I thought you asked me to let you do it. Mrs. Pearson says that I thought that you will ask me to let you do. I thought that you are going to do it by yourself. Mrs. Israel, I did, but not as me, as you. Yes, I will do that. I will handle the problem. I will learn a lesson to your children, but not as you. Okay? Just what is she planning to do now? It is very interesting and mysterious. Mrs. Mrs. Pearson, but that's impossible. Again, she interrupts and knocks Mrs. Israel that it is impossible. How can you handle the problem? This is my own familiar problem, and you are sent to be at my place, and you will learn them a lesson. If they are going to react you badly, then I could not blame at them. It will be your responsibility if you are going to do. Next, Mrs. Fitzgerald, how do you know? Ever tried it? How can you blame? How can you deny me to do like that? Have you tried ever? Have you done it in your family even or previously? So Pearson says, no, of course not. I have never tried such plan, and I have never tried to do something like that. Mrs. Fitzgerald coolly in the relaxation moment, I have not for some time, but it's still out to work. Mrs. Fitzgerald says that I have never done it, but I believe, this is my trust, that this idea will definitely work. Won't last long, but long enough for what we want to do. It will not be durable for a long period of time, but it will be enough as we want to do. Means it will be enough to solve your problem during the period until the magic will work. I'll solve and handle all the problems, and I'll learn them a lesson. Learned it artist, of course, where they were up to all these tricks. She tells her, I mean Mrs. Fitzgerald tells Mrs. Bearson that I have learnt it from artist, and this trick will definitely work. This is my trust. She holds her hand out across the table, keeping the cigarette in her mouth. Give me your hands, dear. What was the process as she was going to do? It was very strange. Okay, she was smoking a cigarette, and she holds Pearson's hand, stretching out her own hands, and says, give me. Mrs. Pearson, previously, she is again confused. What was going to happen next? I don't know. Is it right? Mrs. Pearson doubtfully says that I don't know. I do not have any idea what you are going to do. Is it right? Mrs. Fitzgerald, it's your only chance. Give me your hands and keep quiet a minute. Mrs. Pearson confuses a lot about the moment that Mrs. Fitzgerald was going to do. I mean, it was very strange to Mrs. Pearson. She was worried about that. Mrs. Fitzgerald says that, give me your hand and keep quiet for a minute. Just don't think about anything. You are requested not to think and be silent. Taking her hand, now look at me. She says that, look into my eyes. And they stare at each other. They were looking into the eyes of each other, muttering, Arshata, Dam Arshata Lam, Arshata Landum Bona. It was something like mantra which Fitzgerald was chanting. What happens after that? This little scene should be acted very carefully. As the hint has been given, we are to assume that the personalities change bodies. Okay? During this period, during this moment on the stage, the personalities, inner personalities of both will change each other. And if the life were out of them, the both come to life. Okay? For some time, they were out of their life. It seemed that there was no life in their body. But after some time, personality of each other each must try to adopt the voice of mannerism of the other. They were adopting the mannerism, the manner, the way of speaking. Means their soul were changed with each other. Now, Mrs. Pearson's soul is in Mrs. Israel's body, and Mrs. Israel's soul is in Mrs. Pearson's body. But the tone, but the voice, all the mannerism was as usual. Next, so now Mrs. Pearson is bold and dominating, and Mrs. Israel is nervous and fluttering. Now their way of behaving has been changed completely. Now the reactions of Mrs. Pearson is just like Mrs. Israel. She has become very bold and very dangerous, and Mrs. Israel has been changed into Mrs. Bearson. She is speaking very normally and just fluttering voice of tone. Mrs. Pearson now with Mrs. Israel's personality. Now Mrs. Pearson, she is originally Mrs. Israel because the soul of both has been changed together. So what happens next? See what I mean. Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Pearson is speaking, but whenever the dialogue for Pearson has been written, you will take it that Mrs. Israel is speaking. Okay, because the soul of Mrs. Israel is in Mrs. Pearson. So what does she speak? See what I mean, dear. She notices the cigarette here. You don't want that. She snatches it and puts in her own mouth, puffing contentedly. Now, Mrs. Pearson, she looks at the cigarette which Mrs. Israel was smoking and puffing smokes in the room. She snatched, okay, Mrs. Pearson snatched and took the cigarette from her hand and began to smoke it, and she began to puff contentedly. Next, Mrs. Israel, now with Mrs. Pearson's personality, looks down on herself and sees that her body has changed and gives a scream of fright. Mrs. Pearson, her soul is very scared. See, when she had a look of her own body, she thinks that I am Mrs. Pearson, but my body is just looking like Mrs. Israel. So she was very